Good morning, students. Today is a good morning, and I would like us to continue with our syllabus coverage. Now, during our last lesson, I introduced you to the course outline, where we said that this semester we are going to cover 6 major topics for General Studies 2. Now, and we said that the first topic is called communication. So this is our first topic, communication. Now, I want us to start by defining what is communication. Then from there, we look at interpretation of words. Then we look at simple report writing. And then we shall look at the types and the purpose of official forms. Then we look at the writing of formal letters. And finally, we look at human and public relations. Now, let me start by defining communication. We normally define this term as a process. So we say that communication is a process by which information is relayed from the sender to the receiver and feedback is given. So, we have got several elements in the process of communication. We have the sender, that is the person who is giving information. We have the receiver, that is the person who is receiving information. We have feedback. Feedback is what is given back after the receiver has received the message or information from the sender. We also have other elements like message itself. What is a message? You need to understand that. Then you also need to understand what is encoding. You know, the first thing, what happens is that information is not usually organized information. First of all, the sender of information perceives what we call a stimulus. So there is what we call stimulus perception. Now, stimulus is that stimulus. Yes. Stimulus. That's the spelling. So, stimulus is that message which is not organized. So, just a perception. Something comes to the sender's mind, and then the sender wishes now to convey that what has come to his or her mind in form of information. Now, that stimulus is usually encoded. So now this is another element, encoding. Encoding means trying to simplify that stimulus into now information that can be understood by the receiver of information. Now, when the receiver receives that information, there is something we call decoding. Now, decoding is trying to interpret, trying to understand, so that now you can give appropriate feedback. Remember, as a receiver of information, you have to encode, you have to decode, you have to try to interpret the message so that you give accurate information. Otherwise, if interpretation is wrong, then you will also give the wrong feedback. Now, so that is just introduction to communication, and I would like you to understand that we have got different forms of communication. We have what we call so these are forms of communication. Forms of communication. Now we have got several forms of communication. Number one, we have what we call written communication. We have non-verbal communication. We have what we call the verbal communication. Okay. We have the verbal communication. Now, we also have what we call the audio communication. And we have got what we call the audio-visual communication. The visual communication. And finally, we have what we call the audio-visual communication. Audio-visual communication. Audio-visual communication. Now, look, let's begin with the written communication. This is communication which is inscribed on a surface where you write. For example, now you can see I'm communicating through writing. So this is a good example of written communication. We have letters, we have reports, we have written messages. All those are forms of written or types of written communication. Now, what are the advantages? What are the advantages of written communication? Because for an organization to consider using this form of communication, there must be some advantages. Now, for one advantage of written communication. So now here we look at advantages. Now, one advantage is that this form of communication can be stored for future reference. That's one advantage. Advantage number two is that written communication confirms a spoken agreement, whereby if you had an agreement in speaking and then it is written down, that is a confirmation. Okay? Now, another advantage is that written communication is a source of evidence, or it serves as evidence on what was agreed. Okay? Another advantage is that written communication is used in effecting transactions like purchasing, buying, of goods and services. That's why you find receipts. A receipt is a form of written communication that this person has paid this amount. So in any case, the seller cannot say, you didn't pay, because there is that evidence. Okay? And of course, written communication is very reliable. That's another advantage. Why? Because the sender of written communication takes time to analyze the message, prepare the message, and so forth. Okay? Now, those are advantages. Of course, there are some disadvantages. Okay? Now, some of the disadvantages of written communication include this form of communication does not favor the illiterate, those people who are not educated, or those people who cannot read and write cannot benefit from written communication. And again, there is something we call a language barrier. For example, if written communication is in a language that you cannot understand, you cannot interpret. For example, if I started writing in Arabic here, there would be a very big barrier because maybe you don't understand Arabic. So, language used in written communication can also be a barrier. And then it is also costly. It is expensive in terms of materials, stationery. For example, you need books, you need a whiteboard like this, you need all of those forms of stationery, the different kinds of stationery. However, it has been proven that written communication is more reliable because it has got more advantages than disadvantages. Now let's look at non-verbal communication. We say that this is a form of communication through it is a form of communication in which the sender uses sign language or body language, gestures. That's why we call it non-verbal. There are no words. So it is a form of communication through body language. Yeah. For example, if I meet you on the way and then I just do like this, without saying anything, you will wave back because that's a body language. Okay? Yes. Now, what are the advantages of non-formal communication? So let's look at advantages of non-formal communication. Now, some of the advantages are that the non-verbal cues, we call these gestures cues. So the gestures that are used are referred to as cues. Now, gestures or cues can be used to reinforce a spoken message. maybe you say something and then you incorporate gestures in that. That is an advantage. Now another advantage is that it is fast in transmission, because you just need gestures and then you transmit the message. There is no much speaking, no much writing or no writing at all. So it is fast in transmission. Another advantage of nonverbal communication is that it is appropriate for the physically disabled, especially the blind, sorry, not the blind, the deaf, those who cannot hear. That's why you see even at the news hour, there is that sign language interpreter who tries to communicate to the people who cannot hear. So that is an advantage. Now there are some disadvantages, however. Some of the disadvantages of nonverbal communication is, for instance, those nonverbal cues or those gestures can be misinterpreted, where you find that maybe you don't understand the gestures that have been used by the speaker, you see, so that becomes a disadvantage. And then another disadvantage is that it doesn't favor those people who are blind. That's a physical disability that cannot favor nonverbal communication. The blind, if you cannot see, then there is no way you will benefit from this form of communication. However, it has been proven a good form of communication, and it is used in most instances. Verbal communication is a form of communication through spoken words. So here we just use spoken words, like what I'm doing right now. I'm speaking. That's a form of nonverbal communication. Now, there are some advantages of verbal communication. For instance, we say that verbal communication is very fast in transmission. That's one advantage, because like now we are communicating using words, so it's just listening and then the sender relays information. That's all. Number two, there is immediate feedback. No communication through verbal communication. Verbal communication is one-on-one in most cases, face-to-face, even sometimes during meetings, even sometimes during debates, during lectures. For example, if it's a physical class, but now this one is online. But if it was a physical class, then I would be communicating verbally, and then feedback would be immediate. You will be able to ask questions where you don't understand, and that feedback would be immediate. Even now, I also request you to ask questions maybe where you don't understand, and that will be answered, or your questions will be answered. Okay, so that is another advantage. And we, however, have some disadvantages. For instance, we say that verbal communication is usually very unreliable. It's unreliable. Why is it unreliable? Because time for preparation is not adequate. No, when you are going to give a speech, maybe sometimes you don't even prepare. Sometimes it's an impromptu speech where you're just ambushed and you're told to talk about something. So that lacks preparation. And again, another disadvantage is that it cannot be stored for future reference. So there is no reference for the future, because it's just spoken words, you see, and many other advantages. However, it's a good form of communication. Audio communication, this is a form of communication through sound. Yeah, for example, hooting of matatus, whistles, like a referee when he is conducting a match, he uses a whistle to communicate to the players and some sign language. Okay. Now, I have given advantages of the same and disadvantages of the same or through the notes that I have posted on the portal. So you will look at the advantages and disadvantages of use of sound. Now, visual communication. This is communication through sight or through what you can see. Okay, for example, graphs. When I use a graph, that is something that I can see, or even pictures, photographs, maps. You see, even a whiteboard like this one, it presents a visual communication. That's what you can see. Now, advantages of use of graphs tables and such other forms of visual communication is that complex information can be simplified, or complex message can be simplified. Yeah, that's why you find, if for example I decide to use a graph, I just use one graph to represent a lot of information, or a lot of a very long message can be represented in a simple graph. That is an advantage. Now, another advantage of visual communication aids is that there is room for reference, or they present a room for reference in the future, where you find that graphs can stay for as long as possible. However, there are some disadvantages. For instance, you find that visual communication or visual aids are very expensive to prepare and even to maintain, and then it does not favor the physically disabled, who are maybe the blind, who cannot see. People who cannot see cannot benefit from the visual communication. And another disadvantage is that feedback is not immediate. You know, when I communicate via a graph, how long will it take for you to give the feedback? It will take some time. And then we have audio-visual communication. This is a form of communication through sound and sight. What you can hear, or what you hear, and what you see. Okay? Now, we usually say that this is a combination of two forms of communication. That is the audio and the visual. Good examples of audiovisual communication is a television, where you can hear what the news anchor is saying, and you can also see the same person. Okay? Or maybe computers, where you have those applications where you can see, even our mobile phones use some applications like the emo and so forth, the videos. Like now, this is a video. It's a good example of audiovisual, because you can hear the sound, you can also see me. Okay? Now, there are advantages and disadvantages as well. Look at the advantages and disadvantages on the notes that I have already posted on the portal. Now, another area of concern in this topic is interpretation of words. So, that's our subtopic number 2, interpretation of words. Now remember, after having learned the different forms of communication, you need to understand, or you need to be able to read and give the meaning of words from a passage. Now, the best way I can teach this subtopic is by giving you a passage that you are going to read, and then you interpret words, or you give the meaning of words from that passage. Because even in your exams, your NET exams, you realize that the first section of this paper, of general studies paper, is a question on interpretation of words, where you're given a passage, you read, and then you answer questions from that passage. You're given even words to give the meaning. Remember, when you're told to give the meaning of a word, you give the meaning of a word as it has been used in the passage, not as you know. Of course, sometimes the meaning might be used the same as what we know it in normal meaning, but sometimes you may find that the way the word has been used in a passage is different from maybe how you know the word, or from the meaning that you know. So it's always good to restrict yourself to the passage and also give the meaning depending on how it has been used. Now, in this regard, I have given a passage that I want you to read through on the portal. I'm going to give you a passage that you're going to read through. There are questions, then you will answer those questions, and then you can send them to me. Now, during our next lesson, we shall look at simple report writings, and there are students who asked me when our classes would be. Now, we have 3 sessions per week. The first session is on Monday, 9 to 10 o'clock, and the second session is on Tuesday, the same time, 9 to 10 o'clock. The next session is on Wednesday at 2 to 3 o'clock. So those are the times when we shall be meeting. So tomorrow is on Friday, we don't have a session, but on Monday I shall give you notes on simple report writings. This we shall do it purely through a video where I shall give samples of reports and how to write reports, and then we shall look at types and purpose of official forms. At the same time, or the same day, we shall look at writing formal letters, and then we shall look at human and public relations, and by that doing, we shall have finished, so we shall have cleared that topic so that we get to the next topic. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for watching this video. Read the notes also, and life will be good. Learning online will be very simple. So thank you very much. Be blessed. See you next time.